Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm John Cripwell.
I'm Becky Brown. Each week during term time, we'll bring you a relaxed but packed episode with classroom conversations, interviews with the experts, and ideas you can actually use wherever you're teaching.
We'll also be sharing a resource we think is worth your time and having a bit of a chat about the maths of life because, frankly, maths is life.
This episode, we're focusing on mixed age teaching and the joys and challenges of small schools. John speaks to two brilliant guests whose combined experience spans classroom teaching, headship, national education policy, and maths leadership at a trust level.
Between them, they've supported hundreds of schools, and in this conversation, we dive into the unique pressures and possibilities of mixed age teaching, what consistency really means in a small school context, and how flexible thinking, collaborative leadership, and pedagogical fidelity can support great maths teaching, even when your school just has 17 pupils.
It is a really great conversation with lots of key takeaways that you can implement in your school, and it's not just relevant to small schools either. And we'll discuss those afterwards, so make sure you stick around for that.
Okay, before we jump into the maths of life, just a reminder that if you missed last week's episode 2, I spoke to the brilliant John Tomset. We talked about lesson design, the difference between teaching and learning, and, unexpectedly, David Beckham's autograph. So make sure you go back and have a listen if you missed that one.
One final thing, John, if you head over to Twinkle and search for the Primary Maths Podcast, you'll find a free PDF companion guide for this episode. It will include the key takeaways from today's conversations, slide-ready summaries, some quick CPD video clips to use in staff meetings, and links to any resources we mentioned in the episode, including the NCETM Mixed Age Guidance and the Chartered College articles.
And if there's anything else that you'd like to see in these companion guides, or I don't know, if you just want to say hello, you can drop us an email at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. Right, time for this week's Maths of Life, where we uncover the surprising stories behind the numbers we live with every day. Last week, Becky, we looked at why we tell the time in base 60, and essentially I blame the Babylonians, the Egyptians, Islamic scholars, and medieval clockmakers. And to be honest, none of them came out looking great. So this week, we're going to talk, as I mentioned last week, about base 10. So why do we count in tens?
Yes.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. It's because we've got 10 fingers. That's it. That's the big reveal. We can move on. No, our number system, like so many before it, is basically just finger maths that got out of hand. It's not divine inspiration. It's glove-based infrastructure. I was quite pleased with that one. And it turns out it's really common. So ancient cultures used all sorts of counting systems based on the human body. Base 5, which is just one hand, simple. Base 20, if you take off your socks and shoes, you've got base 20. Bit chilly in winter, but it works. Base 12, this one was interesting. So this base 12 was based on counting all the segments in your fingers. So pointing with your thumb at the segments in the fingers. So you get 12 there. Base 10 became the most dominant, probably because it's just about manageable when you run out of limbs. But we use other bases all the time, often without noticing. So a dozen eggs, that's based on base 12. 12 inches in a foot, base 12 again. Time, obviously, we talked about last week, base 60, blame the Babylonians again. The colour code on a website, the hexadecimal number. Any idea on that one? Clue, I guess, is in the name hexadecimal.
To do with 6 digits? Have they got 6 digits?
So 6 and decimal 10, so 16, base 16.
Okay, yeah.
And if you're a computer, then it's all base 2, which is binary, basically just ones and zeros, no fingers required. So while base 10 might be the system that we count with, it's not always been the most useful or the most interesting. It's just the one that we could count on, literally.
And it is quite useful, isn't it? I mean, trying to convert things that are in base 10, much, much easier. If you're converting centimetres and metres and kilometres, much, much easier than calculating feet and inches and yards, isn't it?
You're right. These days, base 10, definitely much easier to work with. And the introduction of the decimal system way before I was born in the 1970s for things like measures and things like that and money. Ah, can you imagine trying to teach about pounds, shillings, and pence
No,
these days?
absolutely not.
No.
No, I think,
Feet and inches is bad enough. I'm not sure why that's still in the curriculum, but
no,
you never know with the curriculum review. Maybe it won't be much longer.
That's what I was going to say. Watch this space on this one, on that one, John. Who knows what's going to maybe be disappearing from the curriculum.
Anything on your mind this week, Becky?
Yeah, well, actually, mine is also related to time in a slightly different way. I have encountered a new hobby in the last couple of weeks. So it is. I don't know if you're familiar with speed puzzling. Are you?
No.
I mean, I'm sure you can guess what it is, but we are speed cubers in my house, so we do speed cubing.
I've seen this. I've seen this on YouTube, as in Rubik's Cube.
Yes. At a base level, yes, but it's a bit more complicated than that because there's all sorts of rounds about size of cubes and blindfold and Rubik's clock, if you remember that, is in there as well. So we do a lot of speed cubing. I am definitely the slowest in my family. But we saw when we were away at a speed cubing event, I saw on the news when we were staying in our Premier Inn.
Sorry, you went to a speed cubing event?
We go to lots of speed cubing events, John. There was a huge and lovely speed cubing community.
This is a whole new world.
Cubing Association. Yes, it is amazing. There was a news report about the first Federation approved puzzling championships in the UK, which happened in April of this year. So essentially what it is everybody goes to an event. This one was in Bradford, and everybody at the same time gets the same 500-piece jigsaw, and then they're timed to see how quickly they can solve it. It's a new jigsaw, obviously, so that nobody would have seen it before. So I thought I'd give it a go. I mean, I don't know. How do you know if you're good at these things unless you try them? So I ordered the jigsaw, the actual competition one, so I could compare it to the actual times, and thought I'd give it a go. And where maths came in really was that, well, would you like to take a guess at what the record was from that particular competition? So it's a
500 piece. 500 piece. I mean, that would normally take me about a week, I would have thought. My girls, say, are 12 and 7. And we're up to a few hundred pieces now, I guess, in a jigsaw, but I don't know if we've done any 500. Maybe we have. I don't know. So I reckon maybe in a good minute, if I'm really organised, I could maybe find 2 pieces. So I reckon you're looking at 3 hours for me to do well at a 500-piece jigsaw.
Okay.
Would I come close with that?
No, sorry, John, you wouldn't. The fastest time, and I'm so sorry that I don't have the person's name, but if they're listening, maybe they could let us know and we could share it at a later episode. But the fastest time for this particular competition was 41 minutes and 55 seconds, which then made me think, well, how does that equate to what would I have to do?
Did they have a pair of scissors?
Well, no.
Were they just...
No. It was all televised, you could see. I mean, it's pretty amazing, really. But that basically worked out at 1 piece every 5 seconds. That's where the maths came in this week. So that's what
you're aiming for.
That was what I was aiming for. So I did it. I mean, I think normally jigsaw puzzling should be something for calm, shouldn't it? It's quite a mindful activity. This
sounds a bit more frantic.
It was not calm. I think by the end of it, I had got a little bit mad. I had decided that the easiest way to do it was by commentating what I was doing. So my boys were coming in and out, and it was a lovely teapot design. I think at one point I was singing "I'm a Little Teapot." I'd gone a little bit mad by that point. But I did do it, and I tried not to look at the clock too much because I thought, well, actually, this is my first attempt. And I did it in 1 hour and 26 minutes.
Bravo. Fantastic.
Thank you. So
I think I'd still be finding all the corner pieces after that time. So, yeah.
That was 1 piece every 10 seconds. So not bad. And in that particular competition, I would have come, I think, 78 out of 200, which I'll take that.
Hey, that's anything over halfway, that's better than average, isn't it?
Exactly. That's what I thought. So, but I'll keep you posted on future episodes whether I manage to get below an hour.
Well, you could be leaving us, couldn't you? You'd be leaving us to go off and be a world championship speed puzzler,
Yeah, don't hold your
and
breath, John.
that you'll be doing puzzles in Vegas and New York. Yeah,
Who
yeah, jet
knows?
setting. Yeah, well,
Who
who
knows?
knows where these things could take you?
I mean, there's also that's the solo event, John. There is also a paired event where you can do a 1,000-piece puzzle with a partner, but I haven't yet found anybody that would be interested in doing that with me. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
I'm busy, unfortunately, on that date you haven't
One day,
mentioned
John,
yet.
you never know.
But yeah, you never know. You never know. I'll keep training.
Okay, now it's time for this week's guest interview, which this week focuses on small schools and mixed age classes.
Today, I'm joined by not one, but two brilliant educators whose work has impacted hundreds of schools and whose insights into small schools and maths leadership are well worth your time. Between them, they've led schools, supported trusts, worked on national programmes, published research and shared their expertise at conferences across the country. They bring a huge wealth of experience from the classroom, the leadership office and the system level. One is about to publish a book on small schools. The other has supported over 50 schools in their journey with teaching for mastery and now leads maths across a whole trust. My guests today are Aimée Tinkler and Helen Bowen, and I'm absolutely delighted to have them on the show. Welcome both.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Hi, John. Nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
No, thank you for coming along. So, as always, we'd just like to rewind a little bit and have a think about what maths was like for you at school, because I think it just gives a little bit of a context to your life then as educators, really. So, Aimée, if I start with you, just because you are first on my screen as I look at it. So, what was maths like for you at primary school, particularly?
So, my answer is going to be far less interesting than Helen's. I can almost guarantee it. But I did go to a small primary school. So, for the infant part of my life and a little bit of the juniors, I went to a 2-class school. So we had reception year 1 and year 2 together, and year 3, 4, 5, and 6 together. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought that's how schools worked.
Sure.
And I have to tell you that my memories of primary school maths were a workbook and copying the girl next to me because she was much better at maths than me. And then I also remember when my parents moved house and we had to move from this little tiny school that I was in, which was lovely, to a bigger school. And there was some sort of exam to get in. I don't know why, but there was an exam to get in, and I remember being drilled on my times tables, which I have to tell you, I didn't actually learn until I became a teacher. So the drilling didn't work. So that's really my early memories of maths. I can't say it's been, my passion through my whole career, but that's what I remember.
No, I completely empathise, really. I remember the workbooks in infants, and then when I went into juniors, I was very excited to go into juniors, but we had these boxes full of cards that you would go up and take a card from and then go back to your place and work on it, and it was not the same card as the person who sat next to you, so I could no longer rely on that copying to get me through. And then you take it up and get it marked. I don't remember that much actual teaching in primary school. What about you, Helen? How was maths for you at primary?
Very similar experience to you both. I remember the workbooks as well. And just you start at the beginning of the book and work your way through. And some people got halfway through the book and some people got to the end of the book. It wasn't terribly inspiring at primary school. I think my love of maths came to fruition a little bit more at secondary. But my overriding memory of primary school, though, was I had a teacher in what would be equivalent of year 4, I think, about now, who, if you were really naughty in class, you had to stay in at lunchtime and practice your times tables. I am really good at times tables, and I'll leave it for you to work out why.
So we're saying this is an effective strategy for learning times tables.
Not something that I think I'd advocate now.
No, we're not saying it's the best way, but sometimes it works. So just to give a little bit of context to this, I was talking to Aimée about working with small schools, because Aimée, you've got a book coming out, haven't you? Later, as we're recording this in June, you've got a book coming out, I think, in the autumn. Is that right?
It's with the publishers, so it's all done and ready to go. So it's as long as I've never written a book before. I don't intend to do one again. It's not my home, I have to tell you. So that's on record now. So if I do come up with that idea again, please tell me. But it should be due out, I think, in July. So pretty.
Oh, okay.
Although
not long to go. I ought to share that I have a slight vested interest in small schools because I work with quite a few small schools, and I've always found them really interesting places to visit, really lovely, often the sort of heart of the community and things, and we talk about that a little bit more later. But when I told Amy that it was about maths, she said, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Amy, I know somebody brilliant who can talk about the math side of things. And that's how I was introduced to you, Helen. So it's great to have you both along, so that we can, just find out a little bit more about maths in small schools and small schools generally. So you've both had significant experience, I think that's fair to say, in working in and with small schools. We were talking just before we started recording. Helen, you were a head in a small school, is that right? Are you able to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. A really tiny school with mixed year group classes. We had 3 classes, reception year 1 and 2 in one class, and then 3, 4 and 5, 6. Wonderful village school with a huge heart to it, somewhere that is a wonderful place to send your children. Every child is known. But I've also been a teacher in a mixed age classroom environment as well, so I feel like I've earned my stripes and a t-shirt with the challengings and blessings of small schools and mixed age teaching. So it has been something that I've been really passionate to try and get right, and particularly in maths teaching, it is not as easy to think about rolling curriculum programs because a lot of A has to come before B quite often, so it's been something that we've worked really hard on, both in my role as a teacher and as a leader, but also I'm heavily involved. I'm a specialist with one of the country's maths hubs, with the Glow Maths Hub, where we have a lot of rural schools that are small, that have mixed age challenges, and equally with the trust that I'm with now, with Excelsior, and we're more city based, but we have 2 small schools amongst our 8. So it's a really important part of my role to support those teachers in getting things right and getting the best outcomes for children.
Fantastic. And we'll talk in a little while, if that's okay, just in a little bit more depth about what maths could look like, I suppose, in those settings. Amy, how about yourself? What's your sort of background and experience with education generally, I suppose, and small schools in particular?
So education generally. I've been a teacher for 20x years. I'll let everybody else work that out.
It's okay. We just do approximations on this show. We don't worry about the accuracy of the maths. It's fine.
Good. Yeah, that's good. So I started my career in city schools, and I worked in a very grandly named project at the time, which was called the Fast Track Teacher Programme. And my job was to go from school to school in special measures and to help the leadership team as a new teacher, as a classroom teacher, to kind of improve the school. But then when I had my 3rd child, I decided to move back to Derbyshire, which is where I grew up. And at that point, I first experienced small schools. I worked in my first very small school of 2 classes. I've been a junior teacher my whole life, and the head teacher at the time said to me, "Do you want to teach the juniors or the infants?" And I thought, "Hey, do you know what? I'll teach the infants. That sounds like it'll be good for my CV." Obviously spent the whole holiday working out how to teach phonics and what it actually was. And then I worked my way up. My children came to my school. I became the head of school. And I did that for 8 years before I moved into kind of the trust sector. So in terms of my kind of in-school experience, that's really where I've kind of come from. But on this side of that, I do quite a lot of work nationally. So I'm president of the Chartered College of Teaching at the moment, which is a pretty exciting role. And it kind of gives you access to, or I've just been lucky to find myself in rooms of people who have got some sway over the whole system, like Ofsted inspectors or the DFE, etc. And it became very quickly apparent as the head of a small school that they just had very little idea about what it was like teaching and leading, because you're often doing both. So I was the head of school, but also taught 4 days a week in a small school. And so I don't know, I don't like to just sit by and let things happen. So I done my best to kind of explain to the system and anybody who will listen that actually teaching in a small school is different. Leading in a small school is different. It's not necessarily a deficit model, and you will definitely get that theme running through the book. And actually that a lot of teachers and leaders of bigger schools have actually got quite a lot to learn from small school leadership and teaching, particularly as we know, falling roles everywhere, it's going to happen, and that more and more classes are becoming mixed. So that's my background.
Yeah, we were just talking just before we started recording about that. There was I read a report last week. I think it was Teacher Tap actually published it to say that 20% of their respondents had taught mixed age classes this academic year, 24-25, and then there were another 5 or 6%, I think, who who hadn't taught mixed age classes this year, but were expecting to next year. So it's definitely a growing number, whether this is a blip after COVID or whatever in terms of pupil numbers or just the way that the world's going to be. It's definitely a growing picture. My experience, I taught mixed age in the first 2 schools that I worked at, but they were both sort of 1.5 form entry primary. And I think you're right, Helen, that there's definitely something about maths in particular that makes teaching that subject in mixed ages particularly challenging. What do you think that is?
I think because a lot of the skills that you develop in maths have a lot of prerequisite skills and knowledge that you need to have before you can move on, and the way our national curriculum is written very much has that A before B before C approach through it, in comparison to other subjects, which I'm not diminishing in importance obviously, but really in geography, for example, if you're teaching rivers before you're teaching volcanoes, then it's not going to have a huge impact on the children's learning.
You don't need to understand what a meander is in order to understand what a volcano is. Yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, we've got to be really mindful of what the children's experiences are going to be like in the classroom, and if you have multiple year groups in one class. We've got one of the schools that we've worked with through the Glow Maths Hub is similar to one you've described, with only 17 children in it, and there are 3 year groups in across 2 classes, and so they've had to think really cleverly about their curriculum and how they deliver that knowledge to the children, because otherwise you'd be so thinly stretched, the children would never get the opportunity to learn the maths that they need to know during their primary school journey. So it has been something that we've been thinking a lot about as a hub, and I know the NCTM as well have been thinking about that a lot, and I know that they've been putting together some guidance and resources as well to support schools.
You could have year 5 and 6 as one particular mixed age, but you could also have year 3, 4, 5 and 6. 2, 3, 4, all different combinations, which I think makes it difficult for anybody to put out a sort of blanket solution. Maths can be a challenge of working in a small school. I think there are other challenges as well as opportunities. As you said, it's not a deficit model by any means, but there are other challenges that accompany being a teacher in a small school. For those who haven't worked in a small school, could you sort of talk through what it's like?
Yeah, so a lot of the challenges are very similar to working in a bigger school, but in a small school you certainly got less people to split the jobs between. I think sometimes people think of it as idyllic. It can be idyllic. Like, I honestly really believe in small schools, and they're brilliant places to be a child. All my children went to small schools. I went to one myself, and I seem to have turned out okay. But I think the challenges are around the lack of people to split the jobs between. That said, small school leaders and teachers are often some of the hardest working people that I know. The real challenge, as Helen was explaining with the curriculum, in maths particularly, is actually the curriculum in lots of areas, because it's really difficult. We know now, especially when Ofsted went through their 2014 framework and everybody, not prompted by Ofsted as they say, but probably prompted by Ofsted, looked at their curriculum again, and everybody looked at the sequencing, and we were all kind of trying to find the way to sequence the curriculum and build on prior knowledge. That's really complex in all subjects in a small school, particularly if your year group mix changes. And without teaching people to suck eggs, for people who haven't ever taught or been in a small school, actually, when you explain this, it's kind of mind-blowing. So, for example, 1 year in my school, where I was also the head, I taught reception year 1 and year 2. Okay, great. Set the curriculum. Let's do it. We've got it. It's reception year 1 mix, but I'm sure we can work it out. Reception key stage 1 mix. We've done it. Next year, I had reception year 1, 2 and 3. Now, if you just think about how, take maths aside, how the history curriculum, for example, works, it's kind of a suggestion that you probably need to change your curriculum every single year. So that piece of work that everybody did in 2014 could almost be a perpetual piece of work that small schools have to look at again and again. And to start off with, and the data really did show that, Ofsted were finding it quite hard to get their head around how that could be as effective for the children as a very, a more simple year-on-year build-up curriculum. And to start off with, quite a lot of small schools were finding that they were getting requires improvement, and the data shows it. That it was published in the TES. Lots of small schools were getting requires improvement because it was difficult to get your head around how that could work. And I was really lucky to do some work with Ofsted, who were great and listened, and we did some work together with a group of small school leaders about how there's a different journey. We're all aiming for as good at outcomes, if not better, because small schools are pretty epic for the children in small schools, but it's going to be a slightly different journey to get there. So that's probably the thing that most people come to me to say, I don't know what to do with the curriculum. This is a nightmare. This isn't working the way that I think it should. So that's probably the biggest issue, I guess, and the amount of people.
Yeah, you end up wearing multiple hats, I guess, rather than just being the maths lead. You might be the maths lead and the science lead and the IT lead and the a new lead I was learning about today in a school I visited this morning. The head teacher was telling me that they've just had a diktat through that you need to have a data person now that's in charge of data after these malware sort of things that have been going around recently. So yeah, every school's got to have a nominated person in charge of that for next year. So that'll be another hat that somebody in a small school has to don. So you were talking a lot about the curriculum there, Aimée, and the challenges that it can pose for smaller schools. We're in the middle of a curriculum review at the moment. What changes would you like to see happen to the curriculum more generally? Perhaps, Aimée, if you could think about that. And then Helen, perhaps with maths in particular in a moment, that might support colleagues working in smaller schools.
Yeah, so Becky and Jon and the curriculum team have been brilliant, really, in listening to the small school element of the system. And actually, I think probably since I first started banging this drum, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably, there's much more recognition of small schools and the fact that they are different. And it's much more part of the national conversation, partly prompted by the work that the Church of England do, the National Society, because lots of their schools are the small schools, they are church schools. So the curriculum and assessment review, I think it probably doesn't need to say anything different for small schools than it says for everybody else. I think the general feeling, and certainly from a charter college perspective, our kind of feedback to that review was that the primary curriculum is too stuffed full, and that actually if you're genuinely doing a really, really good job of every single subject, there's not enough hours in the day. And so that, I think, probably would be a welcome reflection for lots of the profession, but particularly in small schools.
And Helen, I can imagine that you are probably going to echo what Amy's just said there generally, for maths particularly. There's obviously a feeling that the maths curriculum is is over full. Is there anything in particular that you might consider moving, changing the sequence of?
I think, like you've both said, there's a lot packed in, and particularly I know sort of conversations with colleagues at NCTM and looking at some of the things that appear really early in the curriculum, thinking about sort of introduction to fractions in Key Stage 1 in Year 2, and of course it's all about halves, thirds, and quarters, and just those words from a language point of view bear no relation to the denominator of 2, 3, and 4. And so, that's a very difficult concept and link to make at such an early age when you're only really doing a light touch in Key Stage 2. When in the early days of the NCTM and the Maths Hubs programs, where we were more sort of still having that relationship with schools that we were working with in Shanghai, for example, we had sort of exchange programs where some of the teachers from Shanghai would come over to the UK and they would lead model lessons, and they were really shocked about some of the content that is contained within the national curriculum. They couldn't believe that Year 4s were working on area and perimeter, for example. And they very much felt, as I think is really true, if you spend more time getting a real depth of understanding around number sense, around additive relationships, around multiplicative relationships first, all of those things then come so much more naturally and are not, don't feel like alien topics that don't bear any relationship, don't connect, but actually they really do. And with a much deeper understanding, stripping it back but going to depth rather than trying to cover everything, I think actually then you can accelerate and be more successful later on in the primary curriculum.
I completely agree. I was lucky enough to be in a school this morning, and we were watching a lesson on time in Year 2. I got slight PTSD actually, because when I did my PGCE many years ago, the first activity, on your PGCE or whatever you were doing, but you often asked to start with a group work activity, and so I was put in a very nice primary school in Belper in Derbyshire, and the lovely teacher, her name was Roz, said, "This is a little group I'd like you to work with. I'd like you to teach them time." And I thought, that's great, because I wasn't particularly confident with maths, but I could tell the time. And it was only when you sit down to start teaching it that you realise that actually I don't know where to start with teaching. But
completely understand.
It was a real hospital pass that I was given there. I can imagine her smiling about it afterwards. But this morning I was watching a lesson and they were talking about quarter past and half past. And I was just thinking about how if there was a really clear understanding of what quarter, how that related to a quarter of a shape, particularly a circle, given that it was analog time, but also, that idea of a quarter of a quantity and things, that they're quite, although they're connected, they're quite abstract and difficult to understand as well. So for me, just thinking about when those things are introduced, that some thought is given to, if we can understand what a quarter of a circle looks like, in different orientations as well. So it's not always the same quarter of the circle that we're looking at. Talking to a colleague afterwards, and he was saying, if you could show it as sort of 5 past to 20 past as well, or 10 past to 25 past, because that's also a quarter of an hour, isn't it? See those in different orientations as fractions before you see it as time. That would really help with that understanding and that connectedness of what a quarter is. So I think this is possibly an opportunity to revisit those sequences as much as the content, and really give some thought to where we teach things and why. So sticking with maths then, how do small schools typically approach maths teaching, and what are the particular pressures or opportunities that come with mixed age teaching? I'll open that up to whoever would like to go first on that.
Shall I go, Aimée? So obviously it needs a lot more thought, really. And even just before we talk about mixed age teaching as well, just a little sort of nod to our small schools that have single form entry as well. I think sometimes planning your maths curriculum can feel like you've got, how are we going to represent all of these things and fit them in? And when you haven't got a parallel teacher to bounce your ideas off, you're looking to other year groups, looking to your maths leads as well, and having to think more creatively as well. So it can be a little bit more of a lonely job there for some of our schools. But for mixed age teaching, I know when I was teaching in a mixed age class, I had to have a real flexibility in my approach. It would really depend on what the maths topic was that I was teaching, adult support that was available as well to me, and how I would then approach it. So and it really would be on a lesson by lesson, topic by topic basis, really. So there'd be some lessons that were really conducive to starting a whole class together, and teaching as a year 3-4 teacher at the time. I'd start everyone off together, perhaps on a topic about, if this was a topic on addition, for example, because that would be a good retrieval opportunity for my year 4s, and they were able to support the year 3s, and let's get everybody ready for the year 3s then to be able to go off and do an independent task. And then I'd extend the year 4s on to working with the larger numbers that they were required to do their calculations with. But then there'd be other occasions where there wasn't really any commonality between the areas of the curriculum that I needed to teach in both year groups. And actually I'd have to think about, right, I need to teach the year 3s separately from the year 4s. And so to facilitate that, I had to think carefully about, a task that I could use that would extend one year group while I was able to give input to another year group without it being a holding and pointless task. It wanted it to be something that was really constructive, that was going to support their learning, and then be able to leave that year group as an independent group and go back to the other class and the other year group and give them the input that they needed for their next topic. And that required a lot of, as a teacher, that required not just the subject knowledge around maths, but it also required our children to be really well versed in being able to have that independence. And actually I think that is a real advantage of mixed age classes and small schools, that our children have to learn that sense of finding a little bit of resilience and finding strategies to work through things themselves, because they haven't always got access to an adult that can help. And so that can actually be a real positive for those children. I was very blessed in that class and the school where I was head. We had some magnificent teaching assistants who really knew their stuff as well. So they would be absolute experts in being able to support the children that were looking at an independent task and perhaps did need that little bit of a boost, a few clues and so on, to be able to access that learning. In one of my schools, we were lucky we had enough space to be able to physically separate the year groups if needed, and a magnificent TA. We would, discuss the learning at the beginning of the day and what was going to be happening, and she would take a group and deliver that learning to those children. And then the following day we'd switch so that we both obviously got access to all the children that were in the class. So that's how I managed it as a class teacher, and it it was that there were real benefits for the year 3s, inevitably absorbed from the year 4s some of the things that they were doing. The year 4s were then able to really reason with their understanding because they were able to support the year 3s, and actually being able to discuss and talk about their own reasoning and problem solving was really powerful for them to get that depth of understanding as well. But the NCTM, I know as well, have been working hard on some resources that will be coming out to Maths Hubs soon as well about what another way that mixed age teaching could look like. But I feel I've hogged the conversation a little bit. Amy, have you got anything?
Well, no,
to...
not at all, Helen. I was going to say it sounds like flexibility of thought and adaptability is really important and key, as it is in teaching generally, isn't it? You know, you've got 30 individuals in front of you, or 12 individuals in front of you, however many there are. But I think, Amy, I was going to ask, from sort of a leadership point of view, sometimes there's a bit of a concern that there needs to be a consistent approach. We hear the word consistency quite a lot in teaching, and we like a consistent approach so children know what to expect and teachers know what to expect. And if you've got a supply teacher coming in, consistency can help. So how can we reassure, or what would you say to a teacher or a leader who is concerned that from an external point of view, taking a flexible approach to how a lesson is structured or how a lesson is taught, that doesn't align with a consistency of approach? What's the answer to that, do you think?
That's quite a good question. So there's very much a feeling of to fix a school, you make everything consistent and you just get everybody to do the same sometimes. And actually, really to improve a school, you get the teachers to teach the kids as best they possibly can, right? So there are some things that will always remain consistent. For example, the behaviour expectations in a school, whatever your head teacher decides that they are, it makes no difference whether there's every year group in the class or not. You know, they're consistent. The things that we know increasingly mainstream about cognitive science, for example, how kids remember more, learn and remember more, they're consistent whether whoever's in the class. You know, so the power of things like retrieval practice and interleaving and all those things that we are increasingly are mainstream across the system are the same everywhere. Helen is quite right, and Helen has just exemplified brilliantly my point earlier, which is around, actually, if you've been a teacher in a small school, you become so skilled and so expert at so many things that actually you've got so much to give to the system or to another job. So when I'm working with small schools or worked with small schools in the past, there's generally 4 different ways. I've seen so many lessons and taught so many lessons, and had to be flexible and had to think about how I can get these children to really understand this maths or whatever subject it is. But the way you structure the lesson, or the kind of the way you organise the lesson, it's not even necessarily structure, because you still might start with, we're going to retrieve prior learning first, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to build, and we're going to do some independent practice, and then we're going to whatever. However you structure your lesson, it's more the organisation that changes. So Helen's just described like I think we've given them names over time. I don't think they've got real names. I think we can own the names. But Helen's just describes kind of a wave approach where you maybe send some children away and you go, and then there's also an approach that I quite often see where, as Helen described, sometimes the children just aren't doing anything that's the same. The year 3s don't have the prior knowledge to do what the year 4s are doing, and then you have to split the group. And essentially you have to do 2 separate bits of teaching. It's like teaching 2 lessons in one. And if you're really lucky, you can get a TA to deliver that. If you've got a TA who can, or who wants to, or all of the caveats around that. The other thing that's pretty interesting that I've seen before, which is pretty complex and would certainly not ever be something that I would attempt, but I get that some people make it work, is to have a complete continuous provision across mixed ages, obviously for infants, and to work it through that. And so to have everybody doing their continuous provision, doing whatever they're doing, and then to bring different groups back for maths. And again, it's not consistent in the way that every single lesson in our school looks the same, but the expectation that every single one of our children learns what they need to get to the next stage is the same. And the behaviour expectations and the high expectations around achievement are the same. And the way that children learn and remember things are the same. So it does require a bit of flexibility, but there's so much that remains just good teaching.
I'm really glad you said that, actually, Amy, because I was going to say the consistency as well, though, you know, there is flexibility in approach, but in terms of delivery, organisation and logistics, the consistency from the maths curriculum point of view comes from that however you're doing it, you're still having that structure to your lesson where you're opening with a retrieval opportunity, with an anchor task that's going to bring to the forefront of your mind, the key knowledge that you're going to need to attach to the new key learning point. Then the children are being given the opportunity to use representations and that concrete pictorial abstract approach, so that and that's modelled by the teacher, with rose and shine friendly in a mastery approach, that you're modelling to the children how to see the maths, to hold the maths in their hands before they go off, so that they are equipped with practice, guided practice, that's going to help them in their independent practice. So no matter how you organise your lesson, your delivery, your offer to the children has been consistent in that mastery approach, because that has been, shown to make such an impact on all children being able to experience success and then to be successful in their own independent learning.
I think that's really important. I think but everything you've just said there, I completely agree with. I wonder whether part of where this has come from has come from the idea of fidelity, which was another word, along with consistency, that's been used quite a lot, particularly around phonics, and fidelity to a particular scheme and things, which I think occasionally gets conflated with fidelity to a scheme in maths, whereas what we like to talk about really, I don't know if you agree, Helen, but is fidelity to the pedagogy, or fidelity to the approach, but flexibility within that to deliver the lesson that the children in front of you need at that moment in time.
Absolutely. Myself and another colleague at the Glow Maths Hub, we recently ran one of our research and innovation work groups, just looking at how, there are a lot of fantastic resources available out there for teaching maths. And our question that we were asking our participants is how we use those resources, use those schemes, without losing sight of a mastery approach as well. And it was a really interesting study, and it was great to see all of our schools coming back to us and saying, well, look, we use this particular scheme as a vehicle for our maths teaching, but this is how we're applying it, how we're using it for our children in our context, in our school. So that it works well for them, so that the children have the best outcomes possible.
Yeah, but I think it's really important to recognise that a huge amount of work goes into these schemes to try and make them the best that they can possibly be. However, and I know this because I've been involved in writing one myself, you can only, you have to paint in relatively broad strokes when it comes to each lesson. You're giving the best trying to put the best examples of practice in there. However, an individual you cannot cater for an individual child in an individual classroom, and that's where the skill of the teacher comes back in making that those resources fit for that particular class. So, Helen, you are currently working as the maths lead across a trust, Excelsior Trust, is that right? Could you tell me a little bit more about the trust and your role within that trust?
So I'm the Director of Mathematics for the Excelsior Multi-Academy Trust. We're a small trust based in the south and central Birmingham areas, but have just but also we have a school out in Dudley's local authority as well. So my role has been to come in and support those schools, those maths leaders within those settings with their maths diet for their children. And it's a wonderful trust. We've got a real mix, obviously being a more city-based trust. We've got some large, but we also, as I mentioned earlier, we do have 2 schools that are single form intake as well. So it's a real delight to be able to go and work with these schools. It's it's created capacity for developing the maths curriculum. It's been a really, really great start to go and see how the children are getting on with their maths.
It sounds wonderful. We'll go back to that word consistency again. Is your vision for consistency across the schools in the trust? Where does a school's unique sort of character come through, and where can they be themselves, and where do you want to see similarities?
So we are looking for we would like to see the sort of fidelity to the resources that we're using, and using those sequences of learning. As you say, they've been developed by teams of experts who've spent a lot of time putting those resources and things together. But also we do understand the contexts of our schools are very, very different across the city. And, you know, where the children have come from, what their experiences of maths have been, what their parents' experiences of maths have been, are you know, really divergent, really. So, you know, we want to be able to create still, you know, respect and understand that individual identity, so that, you know, we're not so prescriptive that teachers lose any sense of creativity that they might like to have. So it's about achieving a real fine balance between those things. And it was interesting this week. We've been talking this week about careers as well. So I visited one of the schools yesterday, and we talked about how maths was essential for so many careers, and the children had been they'd all come dressed in different outfits for what they were going to be when they wanted to grow up, and we talked about actually how every single person in the room needed maths, making it really essential, which was really good fun.
Oh, that sounds great. Right, how about you, Amy? What would you say to that idea of trusts or local authorities, I suppose? You know, how can we sort of ensure that we don't lose these unique, because is it fair to say that some of these schools are sort of under threat, the smaller schools particularly, in terms of falling pupil numbers?
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. And we know, you know, pupil numbers nationally, we've got over the bubble, haven't we? And they've moved into secondary school. So we know that birth rate projections are going to be lower. And pupil numbers are falling. And I remember it very much. Well, I took all 3 of my children to school with me because he gave me 3 more children in my school, which was like quite a significant amount.
It's quite yeah, that's
right.
It's probably not in anybody's handbook, is it, of how to grow your own small school, but still.
They obviously had a great education too, but you know, but it did make a significant. Losing one family makes a significant difference in a small school.
Yeah.
So yes, the sad reality is that it's hard, and budgets are hard for everybody, and they're particularly hard for some small schools. I would say that working together in groups of small schools is definitely the way forward, however that may be, whether that is within a trust, and that has you know, small schools are not financially the best investment, I guess, probably for some trusts, although definitely not our trust. We support small schools, but you know, that is potentially the way it might go. But yes, groups of small schools definitely more powerful, because if you can share anything, then you know, that is a great benefit for everybody, the staff and the children. And I know that we've got, through the National Society and the Church of England, they are running now a small school network in order to support their small schools better. We identified a gap, that there wasn't really good provision for CPD in small schools, often because you can't afford it, but also you wear 14 different hats, so actually you can't be released to go for a day out. And so we put together the National Small School Inset Day at the beginning of the year. That was in January online, and not everybody, but people held their Inset Day on that day so that they could come to that. We made it super, super cheap. So, you know, there's some really creative ways of thinking about what's going on in small schools at the moment and how to overcome these challenges. And, you know, there is something around the fact that we know that kind of special educational needs within the system is rising, it's changing, it feels different. But we also know that actually in lots of scenarios, small schools are brilliant places to be if you know, have got some kind of additional needs, or you need a smaller setting, or, you know, something around that. So that's a particular advantage, I guess, of lots of small schools. So I think they have to be, the worst things that small schools will probably do is put their heads in the sand at the moment, and think about what your future is and what your group is that you're with. We've got a brilliant federation here where I used to work. You know, they're a group of schools, they're not a trust, they're still local authority, but equally there are great groups of small schools who are really benefiting from being a trust. And I hope that Helen thinks that her small school benefited from being in our trust.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just so important to know that you've got people to go to, and I think that's true in education generally.
Yeah, it's probably a good time to drop this in, John, that just by chance, really, and luck, and just by knowing lots of people who work in small schools, we do actually run a national small schools WhatsApp group. Now, it's very complicated how you have to join. So first of all, you have to find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. That's not because I want more followers, but that's because that's the best way to find me. But anybody who is a small school leader or teacher, Helen's part of the group. Lots of people are. And the chats that go on there sometime are pretty, niche. Like there's a sheep in the fence. How do I get the sheep out? Sometimes I'm in the middle of an inspection and the inspectors aren't understanding quite what I'm trying to do with my curriculum. Can anybody help me articulate that better? So it's a really powerful group, and any small school leaders and teachers are very welcome to join that.
That sounds exactly like the sort of resource that you might need if you do happen to have a sheep stuck in the fence that you need to extricate quickly, or an Ofsted inspector stuck in the school that you also need to help. So we're just about to wrap things up here. Is there any other resources that you would like to sort of signpost for small school leaders, teachers, or maths leaders in small schools? We've got the small schools WhatsApp group, which we can find by hunting down Aimée on LinkedIn or X. She is very easy to find on both platforms. How about yourself, Helen? Are there any particular resources that leaders might look to?
I would wholeheartedly recommend people get in touch with their maths hubs. The NCTM have recently released some guidance for small schools that have mixed age teaching, which is available through contacting your maths hubs and getting involved that way. They've produced various bits and pieces on their website. If you go on to NCTM and Google mixed age teaching, and they've got some suggestions and guidance to how to structure maths teaching. And what they've done is they've suggested that perhaps kind of the model that I was talking about earlier, where you keep your year groups separate in your delivery, as perhaps being appropriate for Key Stage 1 when children are on that very early maths journey, but that accelerates at a rate of introducing new concepts. And then for Key Stage 2, they're looking at like a 2-year rolling programme that they've managed to develop, which is a really exciting thing to look at, where it's a little bit easier perhaps to look at topics in that kind of format. So the best thing to do is find out who your local maths hub is, get in touch with them, and they will be able to support you in that journey.
Fantastic. And yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree and support that as somebody who works for the Maths Hub too. It's definitely the first place that I would start if I was looking for some support with maths, particularly whatever size school you were working with. But it is great to hear that the mixed age resources are coming out soon. So we like to finish with some quick fire questions. So the first one that we like to ask everybody who comes on the show: is there a book, a blog, podcast, or any other resource that you would recommend to a teacher to check out? Aimée?
Yeah, so I've got a vested interest here. So I've thought about this carefully. So what I would say is any teacher, maths teacher, small school teacher, big school teacher, whatever, should check out the Chartered College of Teaching. I think probably most people do know about it now. I was having a look on there last night at maths particularly in preparation for this podcast, and came across some really interesting stuff. I've written some things on there about small school curriculum. There was something about developing maths mastery in mixed age classes. It's a massively brilliant resource, £4 a month. But actually, even more importantly than that, when you're a teacher, you should be proud of being part of the best profession in the world. And the Chartered College of Teaching is certainly advocating for that. So that would be my top tip: join the Chartered College.
Well, I am a member, you'll be pleased to hear, and I've also just had an article published on there today as well. So you can go on there just to read my article, if nothing else. How about you, Helen?
I sound like I'm saying NCTM quite a lot, but I would like to highlight the NCTM's podcast series. There's so many different topics. I've been going through a back catalogue of them recently, and they invite teachers, maths experts, anybody that's got a real passion for maths teaching to come and talk about topics that really shine that light on maths teaching. So I would wholeheartedly recommend listening to those. You know, it's what you want to do while you're on a long car journey is think about math.
Absolutely. Yeah. All day, every day. Right. So next question. One thing you've changed your mind about in your time in education, Aimée?
I've got two. I'm sorry to break the rules. I couldn't decide between the two.
That's okay.
So one of them is very kind of in-school based, which is around the use of schemes. So very much, young teachers would be amazed to hear this probably, but very much when I was a teacher in the classroom, you didn't use schemes unless it was the last resort. You kind of just, part of being a great teacher was like making it all up yourself.
They were a bit of a dirty word, weren't they, a few years ago?
Exactly, like doing all the planning yourself and all of that. And actually, I think we've gone beyond that now, and I've definitely changed my mind. We've got experts writing great schemes which you can use to adapt to your context, and you can use to fit to your children. So that is definitely one thing I've changed my mind about. And the other thing, thank you for letting me have two, is around the idea. I used to be very kind of thinking I will never ever work in an academy. I will definitely always be local authority. But I think there is, and it's not necessarily academies per se, but there is, as I've already said, great power in groups of schools working together. And so I've kind of changed my opinion. Good job, really, as I now work in a trust. But I've definitely changed my opinion about trusts generally and groups of schools working together. I actually think it's the way forward in the current context.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Helen?
I feel like I need to steal Amy's. I wholeheartedly agree with both of those, Aimée. You know, both the use of there's some incredible resources out there now, the schemes and also working with the trust. And I can see the collaboration that in the trusts that I've worked with has just been incredible. I think the thing that changed my mind, it was a little bit of a personal journey, I guess, really, in terms of what my maths education looked like compared to the offer that we're giving to children now, and just the value of concrete resources has just really transformed the way we all think about maths and the way we allow children to be able to see the structure. I think it's just been, I mean, it's nothing new in the making, but for me personally, from when I trained as a teacher to where I am now as, you know, being a specialist with the hub for almost 10 years now, that has revolutionised things for all children, no matter where they are in their maths journey. It helps those children who perhaps struggle to see the connections, to see the structure, but also for those children who, you know, are looking at maths from a different perspective. Perhaps they find maths quite, I don't want to use the word easy, but you know what I mean. But then having to represent that in a different way, it has just absolutely revolutionised how accessible we can make the maths curriculum to all of our learners. So that's been the big one for me, really.
Yeah, perfect. Completely agree with all three of those. So next one, you can only have one of these, I'm afraid, Aimée. Your favourite number and why?
Okay, this is a great question, and I've got a completely self-indulgent answer. So
Excellent.
My favourite number is 7. Because, and I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to tell you and everybody who's listening to your podcast my date of birth, obviously, but it does have 3 sevens in it. And when I was born, apparently, I also weighed 7 pounds and 7 ounces. So you've got to go with 7, right?
Very nice. That's, yeah, excellent. 7's obviously a very important number in your life, Aimée. How about you, Helen?
Well, very weirdly, I chose the number 7 as well. We didn't arrange this ahead of the
what
podcast.
You're actually taking part in is a unique experiment to find the nation's favourite number, and seven is winning, I have to say, at the moment.
Well, for me, it's odd. I think all things that are a little bit odd should be celebrated because that's me. I mean, my personality. It's a prime number. You know, everybody's got to stand out there and be proud of their difference and who they are. It's part of my house number. Not going to give you all of that as well. And I absolutely loved Shed 7 in the 90s. So, you know.
That's the real reason. You can keep your primes and everything else at Shed 7. I know. That's wonderful.
Also S Club 7, right?
Oh, yeah.
And S Club 7.
So
Yeah.
It's all about 7.
Yeah. The Secret Seven. Yeah. Anyway, right. Last question, and then I'll let you go. And huge thanks already for your time this afternoon. But last question: one small thing that makes a big difference in the classroom. Aimée, again, please.
So I think I recently heard somebody talking about we were talking about tackling disadvantage, and they were talking. It was I can't remember who it was. So if the person listens to this podcast and wants to take credit for it, please let me know. But they said, what about if we thought about children who weren't meeting expectations as low attaining and not low ability? So they just happen to be low attaining right now. It doesn't mean that they are low ability. It means that actually they're not there yet. And that made me think, that is really true. It's all about expectations. And we say it often, and we say the phrase, have you got high expectations of your class? And it appears in Ofsted reports and evaluation days and everything else. But sometimes it's just a reflection of, do we actually have the expectation that these children are just not there yet, but they probably could be, and how can we do everything we can to get them there?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And ability gives that idea of something being a fixed sort of capacity, doesn't it? Whereas attainment is just where you are right now. I think that's probably something that's been talked about, particularly in terms of maths, for a little while now. I think it's completely something that should be ingrained in every classroom. So thank you for that one, Aimée. Helen?
Aimée, completely concur as well. And what I'd been thinking about links very cleverly. We talk a lot in the Maths Hub community about the power of yet, and having that growth mindset and encouraging children that that they will get there, they can do it. But the thing for me, I recently listened to a fantastic talk by Abby Cotton, who is the Maths Hub lead for the Boolean Maths Hub, and she was talking about oracy. In the importance, in education across the curriculum anyway, but obviously it was a maths focus for us in our in our sort of focus. And actually, but one of the more generic statements that she read, and I wrote it down so that I could read it to you, she picks up a piece of research that says good language skills are a crucial factor in social mobility. Pupils with the strongest language skills make the most progress in all areas of the school curriculum. So if there's anything that's more tied to children who are experiencing disadvantage, equipping them with the language, the vocabulary for maths particularly, to be able to reason and problem solve and explain how they know, our duty is to give them that vehicle, because actually discussion makes a huge difference in the classroom. And if we can assist all of our children to have that skill, that knowledge, to be able to use mathematical talk to structure their mathematical thinking, then they're far more likely to be great mathematicians.
Completely agree. Thank you so much for that, Helen. Oracy, obviously a big talking point, pardon the pun, currently in education broadly, I think, but for maths particularly, to help support reasoning and problem solving and fluency and everything else that you want a good mathematician to be, I think talking is absolutely key. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for flying the flag for that. And thank you for your time this afternoon. We've gone over slightly. We've been recording for just over an hour, and I could carry on chatting to the pair of you all evening, I think. But you've both done a full day's work already, and I'm going to let you go. But thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk to us, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again one day.
Fabulous. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been great.
Thanks, Aimée. Thanks, Helen. Really appreciate it. Thanks again to Aimée and Helen for joining us on the podcast. Two fantastic teachers and leaders who really make a difference in the schools that they work with.
Yeah, fantastic interview today, John. This is the part of the show where we'll discuss the key takeaways from the interview that you might want to use in your own school or your own practice.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, I just think there's something particularly, whether you're in a small school or a larger school that has mixed age classes, I think there's something, as we mentioned in the interview, something particularly challenging about teaching maths in mixed age classes due to the way that the curriculum is organised at the moment. And the sort of progressive sequential nature of maths, that you really need to learn A before you learn B, and then before you learn C, if that makes sense.
agree. I think it does bring its challenges, doesn't it? I mean, I think generally small schools have got a lot of real positives, like you said. Particularly, there's quite a family feel about a smaller school. I think the sense of community is easier. But when you get to working on a curriculum, like you say, that very much has to have one step before the other, I could see how that is a real difficult thing particularly for teaching of maths.
So for me, the takeaway about the need to be flexible and to adapt the curriculum to meet the needs of the children in the class that you're working with, I think was really pertinent there, and not being afraid to make those changes and to experiment with the way that you're teaching as well. We all know that teaching for mastery is a great approach, but you may need to adapt that, those principles a little bit in order to make it purposeful and relevant for the children in a mixed age class.
Yeah, I think that was very similar to one of my main takeaways as well, John, that mastery is built very much on that sort of whole class discussion and listening in. And I think actually there's probably a real benefit to having that across the age groups as well. Easier with non-maths content, but having those conversations and seeing what different age children bring to the conversation is probably really valuable too. Not very easy to do, but valuable if you can get the balance right.
Nothing's easy about teaching, is it, Becky? But I know exactly what you mean. One of the other insights that Helen highlighted the importance of oracy, and she talked about some research that shows strong language skills significantly influence pupils' academic and social success, particularly in maths and reasoning, where explanations are crucial. And I think there's definitely something about that idea of utilising talk purposefully in classrooms, and where you have got mixed age teaching, having carefully considered where children are sat and whether you're going to separate them into different age groups or mix, year 5 and year 6, for example, together. Bearing in mind that need for talk, I think is possibly one of the factors that you might want to take into account when you're considering how to arrange your classroom for maths.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. I think the structure of classes can be quite important, can't it? I worked in a school that had 1.5 form entry. So we started off by having a year 3 class, a mixed year 3-4 class, and then a year 4 class. But actually the following year we changed to having 3 mixed classes. It just made the conversations easier across the teachers, if you like, about how we would approach certain things as well. So I think the structure is probably, in a small schools, you don't always have the luxury of having somebody to talk things through with. But if that's an option, that might make things a little bit easier too.
Yeah. And just touching on what you were saying there about the structure, I think something that I took out of the conversation was that need to be consistent in approach to the principles of how you want to teach maths at your school, but understanding that it might look different from class to class, and that it's not necessarily important that everybody follows the same 12-part lesson structure. You may need to have a more flexible approach in mixed age classes, but provided you can see where in the lesson revisiting prior learning was planned for and things, then that's okay.
Yeah, I think consistency has come up, I think, in every interview you've done so far, John. It's been a real focus for lots of the conversation you've had. Again, it's not rigid consistency as far as the lesson is concerned, is it? It's about the approach that you have that needs to be consistent. And I think sometimes that can be a bit difficult to strike the right balance for.
I think there can be a benefit of having mixed age classrooms when it comes to oracy in terms of developing reasoning skills and things. I know in the mixed age classes that I've taught in, the younger year group has often benefited from those conversations with the older year group, exposing them to more advanced reasoning and vocabulary at a slightly younger age can have real benefits.
The other thing, John, that I picked up on was the absolutely crucial role of the teaching assistant in a small school. If you're lucky enough to have one, of course, but the ladies were talking about how important that role was, and how it might have been that the TA had to take a group and teach a group and then swap. And I think, they're often undersold, aren't they, teaching assistants, but they really are crucial. I mean, in every setting, crucial, but certainly in a small school, it struck me how important that role really was.
Okay, so time for resource of the week. What fantastic Twinkle resource have you found for us to share this week, Becky?
So this week, I'd like to share the Twinkle Maths app. It's a fantastic gamified web app, and it's designed for mastering fluency facts. It has a variety of engaging games for each year group, and it targets ready to progress criteria. Fantastic for arithmetic interventions. Lots of motivating rewards to help build confidence, and children are rewarded for effort rather than attainment. So all children can compete to be top of the leaderboard. So definitely something that would work in a smaller school, and we could have different year groups competing against each other quite easily that way.
Yeah, it is genuinely a fantastic app, and something that I would be tempted probably to utilise for homework or for intervention sessions and things like that as well. And if you are a Twinkle member, it is there for you to access and to make use of. Well, that's just about it for this episode. Thanks for listening.
If you've enjoyed the show, please do share it with a colleague, whether they're in a small school or not. You can also leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners to find the podcast.
And if you are planning your next staff meeting or staff briefing, don't forget to download the companion PDF for this episode from the Twinkle website. Just search for Primary Maths Podcast at twinkle.co.uk, and you'll find it there, along with links to CPD videos and all the resources that we've mentioned in this episode.
Next week, Jon is speaking to Omar Jennings, the head teacher at Nightingale Primary in London, where they're doing brilliant work using number talks to develop oracy, conceptual understanding, and pupil confidence in maths.
Yeah, it's a cracking discussion, especially if you're thinking about how to make your classroom more talk rich or want to embed mathematical discussion into everyday practice. Omar is really passionate about this, and he's done some fantastic work there. So that's next Tuesday on the Primary Maths Podcast.
Until then, thank you for listening and have a great week in school.
See you next time.